It felt the mark of first blood awakening in the world above. It felt the prophecy beginning to unfold. And it began to plan its freedom. The neutral territory was an estate called Thornhaven, situated in a valley between mountains where no single clan could claim dominance. It was beautiful in a haunted way, Gothic manor surrounded by dead gardens, where roses grew black and silver in the eternal twilight that seemed to cling to the place. Demon's quarters were luxurious and prison-like in equal measure, with windows that wouldn't open and doors that locked from the outside. But he was alive, and that counted for something. The days following the conclave were strange. Representatives from various clans came to visit, each with their own agenda. The Shadowfen Collective sent scientists who wanted blood samples, physical tests, cognitive assessments. Demons submitted to some and refused others, walking the line between cooperation and maintaining his autonomy. The Night Whisper Court sent artists and philosophers who engaged him in conversations about humanity, beauty, and what it meant to bridge two worlds. These sessions were more interesting but no less calculated. They were evaluating him as much as studying him. Seraphine remained his constant companion and guardian. Her exile meant she had no official power, but centuries of experience made her invaluable. She taught him to navigate vampire politics, to understand the subtext beneath every polite question, to recognize when he was being manipulated versus genuinely engaged. "You're doing well," she told him after a particularly exhausting session with a Shadowfen researcher. "Better than I expected, honestly. Most humans given power become either tyrants or victims. You're maintaining your humanity while accepting what you've become. That's rare." Demon collapsed onto an absurdly comfortable chair in his quarters. The mark beneath his skin had settled into a constant low glow, visible if you knew to look for it but not overwhelming. "I don't feel like I'm doing well. I feel like I'm one wrong word away from being dissected." "You probably are," Seraphine agreed cheerfully. "But that's true for everyone in vampire society. We're all one mistake away from destruction. It's just that most of us forget because we've survived so long. You have the advantage of healthy paranoia." Over the following weeks, something unexpected began to happen. Demon's abilities started to manifest in ways that defied all vampire precedent. It started small. He found he could sense vampires even when they were hidden, their presence like cold spots in his awareness. Then he discovered he could temporarily suppress a vampire's powers with touch, not permanently but enough to level a playing field. When a Blackwater warrior tested him in combat, Demon didn't just match the vampire's speed. He predicted their movements as if his body understood vampire kinesthetics instinctively. But the most remarkable development was the one Seraphine had not anticipated. Demon didn't burn in sunlight. It was discovered accidentally when a window shutter broke during a test session. Sunlight streamed into the room, and every vampire recoiled in pain. But Demon stood in the light, feeling its warmth, seeing the way it made the mark in his blood glow brighter, like his veins were channels for liquid gold. "Impossible," the Shadowfen researcher breathed, shielding herself in shadows. "No vampire can tolerate direct sunlight. No creature marked with vampire blood." "He's not a vampire," Seraphine said softly, staring at Demon with something like awe. "He really is something new. A daywalker." The prophecy made flesh. Word of this spread through the supernatural community like wildfire. If Demon Cross could walk in sunlight while possessing vampire abilities, he was more than just a curiosity. He was a strategic asset, a weapon, a revolution. The clans that had voted for his death began to reconsider their positions, wondering if perhaps he could be controlled, utilized. The clans that had supported him became simultaneously more interested and more afraid. And in the deepest cells beneath Blackspire Citadel, the ancient thing that had been imprisoned felt the balance of power shifting. Felt the chains that bound it growing weaker as the old order fractured. Felt opportunity. Its name had been forgotten by all but the eldest vampires, stricken from official records, spoken only in warnings that modern clans dismissed as myth. But it was no myth. It was the reason the First Blood had been restricted in the first place. It was the mistake that had nearly destroyed vampire civilization in its infancy. It was Valdris, the 13th progenitor. The first blood vampire who'd been judged and imprisoned rather than destroyed because even the combined might of all 12 clans couldn't deliver final death. And it was waking up. Demon felt it before anyone else did. A disturbance in his connection to vampire power, like hearing a discordant note in a symphony. He was in Thornhaven's library reading ancient texts about first blood history, when the sensation hit him. Cold, hungry, utterly alien even compared to other vampires. He found Seraphine in the garden, tending the black roses with hands that didn't need to garden but seemed to find peace in the ritual. "Something's wrong," he said without preamble. "Something's waking up." Seraphine's hands stilled. "Describe it." "Like vampire power but wrong. Twisted. Like if all the worst aspects of vampirism were concentrated and amplified. It's coming from the direction of the citadel but deeper. Underground." He pressed a hand to his chest, where the mark pulsed in agitation. "My blood recognizes it. And it's terrified." Seraphine's expression went grave. "We need to contact Lysander. Now." Getting a message to Lysander Ashcroft proved easier than expected. He'd been maintaining covert contact with Seraphine, part of a growing faction of vampires who genuinely wanted to see what Demon could become. Within hours, Lysander arrived at Thornhaven, his usual composure cracked by visible worry. "Valdris," he said after Demon described the sensation. "It has to be. But that's impossible. The seals have held for 3,000 years. "Who is Valdris?" Demon demanded. Lysander and Seraphine exchanged looks. Finally Seraphine spoke. "The 13th first blood. The one that was never supposed to exist. When the progenitors were creating the first vampires, there was an accident. A human was exposed to all 12 strains of first blood simultaneously. The result was catastrophic. Valdris became something that could consume other vampires, absorbing their power, their memories, their very essence. It was unstoppable, unkillable, and utterly mad. The 12 progenitors united for the only time in history," Lysander continued. "They managed to imprison Valdris beneath what would become Blackspire Citadel, sealing it with wards powered by the first blood of all 12 lines. The seals were designed to last forever, growing stronger as the clans grew stronger. But if the clans are fracturing," Demon said slowly, "then the seals weaken," Seraphine finished. "Unity was the lock. Discord is the key. And your existence has brought more discord than we've seen in centuries. So this is my fault?" Demon felt sick. "I survived and now some vampire apocalypse monster is going to break free?" "No," Lysander said firmly. "This is our fault. The clan's fault. We built our entire civilization on a prison, and we forgot what we'd imprisoned because it was convenient to forget. We became complacent, divided, so focused on our petty politics that we let the fundamental purpose of our unity, keeping Valdris contained, become irrelevant." Seraphine stood, her decision made. "We need to reinforce the seals. All 12 clans working together, which means we need to convince Mordecai to call an emergency conclave." "He'll never do it," Lysander said. "Admitting Valdris is waking means admitting our division has consequences. Mordecai would rather let it break free and deal with the aftermath than show weakness." "Then we don't ask permission," Demon said. Both vampires turned to stare at him. "You said I'm the Daywalker, right? The bridge between worlds? If Valdris was created by mixing all 12 first blood strains, and I was created by the original first blood, maybe I'm the only one who can do something about it. Maybe that's the real prophecy, not that I'll judge you for what you've become, but that I'll fix the mess you made before it destroys you." "That's suicidal," Seraphine said flatly. "Valdris consumed vampires as food. You're marked with vampire blood, you'd be irresistible to it. Walking into that prison would be delivering yourself as an appetizer. Do we have another option?" Silence. The terrible silence of people who know the answer but wish they didn't. "There might be a way," Lysander said slowly. "The original prison wasn't designed to kill Valdris. The progenitors tried that and failed. Instead they created a binding that used Valdris's own nature against it. It consumes vampire essence, so they made it consume its own power in an endless loop. But the loop requires maintenance, requires the unity of the clans to power it. If we could restore that unity even temporarily, how do we unite people who hate each other? Demon asked. Seraphine's smile was sharp. We give them something they hate more. We force them to confront Valdris, to remember why they were united in the first place. And you, my marked revolutionary, are going to be the bait that draws them in. The plan was insane, but insane was becoming standard for Demon's life. They would infiltrate Blackspire Citadel, not openly, but through old access tunnels that Seraphine remembered from when she'd helped build the place millennia ago. They would reach the prison seals and deliberately weaken them further, enough to let Valdris's presence become undeniable to every vampire in the region. The resulting panic would force the clans to respond, to unite against the threat they'd all forgotten. And Demon, with his unique connection to First Blood power, would be the one to channel the unified energy into the seals, restoring the prison before Valdris could fully escape. Simple. Catastrophically dangerous but simple. They set out that night, a team of 3, Demon, Seraphine, and Lysander. The tunnels beneath the citadel were ancient beyond reckoning, carved when the world was young and monsters were real. The walls were covered in inscriptions in languages that predated human civilization, wards and warnings in equal measure. As they descended, the temperature dropped and the sensation of wrongness grew stronger. Demon's mark pulsed in rhythm with something ahead, like 2 hearts beating in sync. He could feel Valdris now, really feel it, a consciousness vast and hungry, aware of them approaching. It knows we're here, he said. Of course it does, Seraphine replied. It's been waiting for someone to visit. Probably anyone. 3,000 years of isolation would drive even a stable mind to madness. They reached a chamber that was clearly the heart of the prison. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that glowed with fading power, 12 distinct colors, representing the 12 clans' contribution to the seals. At the center of the chamber was a well of absolute darkness, a void that seemed to pull at reality itself. And from the void a voice spoke. Visitors. How delightful. The voice was like shattered glass dragged across metal, barely recognizable as language. Let me guess, the clans have finally fractured enough that the seals are failing, and you've come to beg me not to break free? Not exactly, Demon said, stepping forward despite Seraphine's warning hand. We came to make you an offer. Laughter echoed from the void, cruel and insane. An offer? You have nothing I want except your blood, little marked one. Oh yes, I can smell what you are. First blood, pure and undiluted. Not mixed like I am, but singular. Focused. Delicious. Come closer. Let me taste. What happened to you? Demon asked instead. The stories say you were human once. What did the mixing do? Pause. Then, it gave me everything and took away everything. I can consume any vampire, absorb their powers, their centuries of existence. I'm all 12 bloodlines and none of them. I am the ultimate predator and I am utterly, completely alone. There is no one like me. No one who understands. I spent 1,000 years trying to die and couldn't. So I embraced madness instead. It's more interesting than despair. I understand loneliness, Demon said quietly. I understand being something that doesn't fit anywhere. And I understand that the clans who made you, who imprisoned you instead of helping you, they're the real problem. Not you. Don't. The word was sharp, almost pleading. Don't you dare try to empathize with me, human. You've been marked for what, weeks? Months? I've been this thing for 3 millennia. You don't understand anything. You're right, Demon admitted. I don't. But I'm trying to. Because I think maybe the prophecy everyone's afraid of isn't about judging the vampire clans. It's about fixing what they broke. And you, Valdris, are the first thing they broke. The first consequence of their fear and their desire for control. Silence from the void. Then softer, what are you proposing? Help us restore the seals. Willingly. In exchange, we don't just imprison you, we find a way to give you what you should have had from the beginning. A place. Purpose. Maybe even peace. Demon knew he was promising things he had no power to deliver, but the alternative was letting Valdris break free and consume half the vampire population. Work with us instead of against us. And if I refuse? Then you break free, kill a lot of vampires, and eventually they'll find a way to stop you. Maybe destroy you this time. And you'll die having never been anything except their mistake. More silence. Demon could feel Seraphine and Lysander's tension, could sense that the seals were minutes away from critical failure. Everything balanced on the response of a mad, imprisoned entity that had every reason to hate the world. I accept, Valdris said finally. Not because I believe you, but because I'm curious. And curiosity is the only thing that's kept me sane, relatively speaking, for 3,000 years. I want to see what you become, little Daywalker. I want to see if you're the solution or just another problem. So yes, I'll help you restore the seals. This time. Lysander immediately began working on the ritual, using his blood to reactivate the fading ward patterns. Seraphine added her own, and slowly, 11 of the 12 seal colors began to glow brighter. But Mordecai's seal, the 12th, remained dark. Without all 12, the prison wouldn't hold. We need him, Lysander said urgently. The ritual requires all bloodlines. He won't come, Seraphine said. He'd rather let Valdris escape than admit we were right to work together. Then we don't wait for him. Demon approached the ritual circle, feeling the mark in his blood respond to the power being woven. I carry the original first blood. The undiluted source. Maybe I can substitute. That's never been attempted, Lysander began. Everything about me hasn't been attempted, Demon cut him off. Let's add one more impossible thing to the list. He cut his palm with a knife they'd brought, letting his blood, glowing faintly crimson, drip onto the final seal. For a moment nothing happened. Then the mark on his skin blazed with light so bright that the entire chamber was illuminated. The 12th seal activated, but instead of Mordecai's silver, it glowed with Demon's unique crimson. The ritual completed with a sound like reality sealing itself shut. The void at the chamber's center solidified, becoming a wall of force that pulsed with renewed power. Valdris was secured again, but differently now, bound not just by law and fear but by choice and promise. Interesting, Valdris's voice echoed fainter now. Very interesting. Come visit again, Daywalker. We have much to discuss about breaking cycles and remaking worlds. They fled the tunnels as the citadel above erupted into chaos. Every vampire had felt the prison's near failure and its unexpected restoration. Mordecai would know they'd interfered, would probably call for their execution again. But they'd also just saved the entire vampire species from its own foundational mistake. Back at Thornhaven, bruised and exhausted, Demon finally asked the question that had been haunting him. What am I becoming, Seraphine? I can walk in sunlight, suppress vampire powers, and apparently substitute for an entire bloodline in rituals. The first blood is changing me into something that's never existed before. Seraphine looked at him with eyes that held 3,000 years of history and countless mistakes. You're becoming exactly what the world needs you to be. Not a vampire. Not a human. But something that can heal the rifts between them. The clans are going to hate that. The other supernatural factions are going to fear it. And humanity will probably reject it because humans fear what they don't understand. But it's what's necessary. No pressure, Demon said again, his exhausted mantra. None at all, Seraphine agreed. Just the fate of multiple species and the potential reformation of supernatural society. Completely manageable for a bartender from the lower district. They laughed because the alternative was crying, and neither of them could afford that kind of vulnerability yet. Outside, the sun was rising, a sun that Demon could walk in while Seraphine retreated to shadowed rooms. The divide made literal. But he reached for her hand as they stood at the boundary of light and dark, and she took it. We'll figure this out, he said. Or die spectacularly trying, she added. That too. In the weeks following the Valdris incident, Demon Cross became the most discussed figure in supernatural politics. The fact that he'd saved the vampire clans from their own forgotten mistake didn't earn him gratitude, it earned him complication. Some clans saw him as a valuable asset to be controlled. Others viewed him as a threat that had only grown more dangerous. And a precious few, began to wonder if maybe he actually was the bridge the prophecy spoke of. Mordecai predictably was furious. He'd called an emergency conclave to address the unauthorized interference with sacred containment protocols, which was vampire bureaucracy for, "How dare you save us without permission?" But the conclave had been surprisingly split. Many vampires had felt Valdris stirring and understood how close they'd come to catastrophe. Demon's intervention, unorthodox as it was, had prevented an extinction-level event. The charges were dropped, but the political landscape had irrevocably changed. Demon was no longer just a marked human under observation, he was an active player in supernatural politics, whether he wanted to be or not. "You've made yourself indispensable," Lysander explained during one of his visits to Thornhaven. "That's either genius or suicidal. Possibly both. The clans can't kill you now without looking like they're willing to risk Valdris breaking free again. But they also can't fully trust you because you've demonstrated power that doesn't fit their frameworks. So I'm protected by being too dangerous to eliminate and too useful to alienate," Demon summarized. "That's the most toxic safety net I've ever heard of." "Welcome to vampire politics," Lysander said with a thin smile. "It only gets worse from here." But something unexpected was happening. Demon was receiving messages from outside the vampire community. Werewolf packs, witch covens, fae courts, other supernatural factions that had heard about the Daywalker and were curious. The supernatural world was larger and more diverse than Demon had imagined, and his existence as something that didn't fit existing categories made him interesting to entities that usually ignored vampire affairs. A werewolf alpha named Kira Ironhide requested a meeting. A witch called the Thorn Mother sent a letter written in ink that smelled of forests and old magic. Even a representative of the Seelie court, which Demon had thought was purely mythological, expressed interest in examining this novel evolutionary development. "They see you as neutral ground," Seraphine explained. "Vampires have complicated relationships with every other supernatural faction. Centuries of territorial disputes, resource competition, philosophical differences. But you're not vampire, not human, not any established category. You're new. And new means unpredictable, which in politics means potential for alliance. So I'm a diplomatic tool now? You're whatever you choose to be. But yes, if you wanted to, you could potentially bridge gaps that have existed since before human civilization. Werewolves and vampires have hated each other for millennia. Something about competing apex predators. Witches distrust vampires because we're unnatural magic made flesh. The Fae consider us mockeries of immortality. But you?" She gestured at him. "You're human enough to understand mortal concerns, vampire enough to grasp immortal perspectives, and unique enough to not owe loyalty to any faction. That's power, Demon. Real political power." He considered this while staring out the window at Thornhaven's twisted gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. He could walk out there right now, something Seraphine couldn't do. The divide made manifest. "I don't want power," he said quietly. "I wanted to live. To not die in an alley over a debt. Everything since then has just been survival." "I know. That's why you might actually succeed where others would fail. You don't want to rule, you want to exist. And that authenticity is more valuable than any political maneuvering." Seraphine joined him at the window, standing carefully in the shade. "But wanting and having are different things. You have power now whether you want it or not. The question is what you'll do with it." Demon made his decision. "I want to meet them. The werewolves, the witches, whoever else is curious. Not because I want to build alliances or play politics. But because if I'm supposed to be this bridge thing, I should probably understand both sides of what I'm bridging." Over the following months, Thornhaven transformed from a gilded prison into an unlikely neutral ground. The werewolf Alpha Kira Ironhide came first, a massive woman with amber eyes and a presence that radiated barely controlled violence. She circled Demon like prey, sniffing him, testing him with small provocations. But she didn't attack. "You smell wrong," she said finally. "Like vampire and human had a child, but the child is neither. My pack elders say you're an abomination. But abominations don't usually save lives. You contained Valdris. That matters to us. Werewolves remember the first progenitor wars. We know what Valdris was capable of. So you get respect even if you're confusing as hell. They talked for hours. Kira explained werewolf culture, their connection to nature, their pack bonds, their fundamental disagreement with vampire philosophy. Vampires preserved themselves at any cost. Werewolves believed in the cycle. Life, death, rebirth. Immortality was antithetical to everything they valued. But you're mortal, Kira said, studying him. You age, you can die. That makes you more werewolf than vampire, philosophically. Maybe that's the bridge. You remind vampires that mortality isn't weakness, it's what gives existence meaning. The Thorn Mother came next, an ancient witch who appeared as a young woman but whose eyes held ages. She examined Demon with magic that felt like thorns dragging across his soul, uncomfortable but not painful. Fascinating, she murmured. Your blood has been rewritten at a fundamental level. Not just genetic but metaphysical. You exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously human and supernatural until observed, and even then both states remain true. That should be impossible. I'm getting used to impossible, Demon said dryly. Then get used to this. The witch covens have been monitoring vampire activity for centuries. We've seen them stagnate, seen them become parasites on humanity. We've wanted to intervene but couldn't justify the war it would cause. But your intervention from inside their system. You're what happens when vampires make a choice that prioritizes life over law. That's hedge magic, dear boy. That's the kind of wild, wonderful chaos that witches specialize in. She smiled, and it was warm and slightly terrifying. We'll be watching. And if you need help making chaos, well, we know a thing or two about that. The Seelie representative was the strangest of all. They appeared as an impossibly beautiful person whose gender seemed to shift moment to moment, with eyes like captured sunlight and skin that reflected colors that didn't exist in normal spectrums. They didn't speak much, just observed Demon with an intensity that made even Seraphine uncomfortable. You've become a thin place, the Fae finally said. A location where the boundaries between worlds grow permeable. Humans walk toward supernatural. Supernatural walks toward human. In the space where you exist, both can meet without either being destroyed. This is rare. Precious. Dangerous. We will watch what you become with great interest. After each meeting, Demon felt simultaneously more confident and more overwhelmed. He was building a network not of allies exactly, but of interested parties. Entities that saw value in his continued existence, that wanted him to succeed not for his sake but for what his success might mean for the larger supernatural community. You're doing it, Seraphine said one evening, genuine pride in her voice. You're actually creating something new. In 3 months, you've made more progress towards supernatural unity than the clans have made in 3 centuries. I'm not trying to create unity, Demon protested. I'm just talking to people. Being honest about what I am and what I don't know. Exactly. That's why it's working. Every other attempt at unity has been through dominance, one faction forcing the others to comply. You're not forcing anything. You're just existing, and that existence is proving that cooperation is possible. She paused, then added quietly, I'm proud of you. I saved your life on impulse, hoping for change. But you've become something I couldn't have imagined. Demon felt warmth at her words, a connection that had grown from convenience to genuine affection. Seraphine was more than his sire, more than his teacher. She was his friend, possibly the first real friend he'd had who understood what his life had become. But not everyone was pleased with his diplomatic success. The attack came at dawn, which was tactically brilliant. Demon was vulnerable to exhaustion like any mortal, and dawn was when he'd naturally be sleeping. The assassins were professionals, sent by a coalition of conservative clans that had decided diplomatic bridges were dangerous to their power structures. They bypassed Thornhaven's defenses using insider knowledge, moved through the estate with military precision, and reached Demon's chambers before anyone could raise an alarm. 3 vampires, each specialized in rapid termination. They'd been given one job: kill the Daywalker before he could wake fully, before he could use any of his strange abilities. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. Demon's enhanced senses meant he woke at the first subtle displacement of air, the first hint of hostile presence. He rolled from the bed as the first blade sliced through where his neck had been a moment before, came up in a defensive crouch, and for the first time since his transformation, felt his body shift into a combat mode that was pure instinct. The mark on his skin blazed to life, illuminating the room in crimson light. He could see the vampire's next moves before they made them, his enhanced perception reading muscle tension and subtle weight shifts. When one lunged, Demon's hand shot out and made contact with bare flesh. The power suppression activated, and suddenly the vampire was just a human with a knife, confused and vulnerable. Demon disarmed them with a move that was more instinct than training, then faced the other two. "I don't want to fight you," he said, his voice carrying authority he didn't know he possessed. "But I will defend myself." They attacked in tandem, but Demon had trained with Blackwater warriors. He'd learned from Seraphine's centuries of combat experience. More than that, his body was optimized to counter vampires specifically. He moved like water, avoiding killing blows by millimeters, retaliating with precise strikes that targeted pressure points vampires didn't even know they had. The fight was over in less than a minute. 3 professional assassins lay unconscious or disarmed, and Demon stood over them, breathing hard but uninjured. The mark on his skin slowly dimmed back to its normal subtle glow. Seraphine burst through the door, already in a defensive stance, then stopped at the scene before her. "You defeated them. Alone. Professional Blackwater assassins." "I think I surprised them," Demon said, still processing what had happened. "And myself." "This changes everything," Seraphine said slowly. "You're not just symbolically powerful, you're actually dangerous. The clans sent killers and you stopped them without killing anyone, which somehow makes it worse. You've proven you're a threat and merciful in equal measure. They won't know how to handle that." The aftermath of the assassination attempt was swift and brutal. Lysander used his political influence to trace the attack back to its sponsors, a coalition of 5 conservative clans. The evidence was presented at an emergency conclave, and for the first time, there were actual consequences. The clans involved were censured, their leaders forced to publicly apologize, and Demon was granted official protected status. But more importantly, the attempt had backfired spectacularly. Every supernatural faction that had been cautiously interested in Demon now saw him as persecuted, as someone the old powers feared enough to kill. Werewolf packs offered sanctuary. Witch covens sent protective wards. Even the Fae, who usually remained aloof from mortal and vampire affairs, made it known that harming the thin place person would be viewed as an affront. "You've become a cause," Kira Ironhide told him when she visited after the attack. "Not just a curiosity. A cause. The various factions are starting to view you as a test case. If the old vampire establishment can be challenged and changed, maybe other rigid hierarchies can be too. You're dangerous to every status quo, which means you're valuable to everyone seeking change." Demon sat in Thornhaven's library, surrounded by texts on supernatural politics, feeling the weight of unwanted destiny pressing down. "I just wanted to live," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know," Seraphine said gently. "But you choosing to live, me choosing to save you, started ripples that are becoming waves. We can't stop them now. We can only ride them and try to guide where they crash." Mixing metaphors but point taken. He closed the book he'd been pretending to read. "What happens now?" Now you stop reacting and start acting. You've proven you can survive vampire politics and defend yourself. You've built relationships with other factions. You've demonstrated that cooperation between supernatural species is possible. It's time to actually use that influence. To propose something radical. Like what? Seraphine's smile was sharp and revolutionary. Like a council. Not of vampires but of all supernatural factions. A place where werewolves, witches, vampires, fae, and whoever else we've forgotten about can meet on neutral ground. With you as the mediator. The bridge made political. That's insane. They'll never agree to. 6 months ago you were dying in an abandoned church. Now you're having tea with werewolf alphas and being gifted protective magic by witch covens. Insane seems to be your specialty. Demon thought about it. Thought about all the conversations he'd had, the patterns he'd noticed. Every supernatural faction operated in isolation, protecting their own interests, viewing others as competitors or threats. But they all faced similar problems. How to exist in a modern world that was increasingly hostile to mystery, how to maintain their cultures while adapting to change, how to prevent extinction through stagnation. A council, he said slowly, where grievances could be addressed without war, where resources could be shared, where someone like Valdris could have been helped instead of just imprisoned. Exactly. It would revolutionize supernatural society, undermine centuries of established power structures, probably result in assassination attempts from multiple directions. Seraphine's eyes gleamed. But it might also be exactly what the prophecy actually meant. Not judgment through fire, but judgment through evolution, forcing the supernatural world to grow up. Or die trying, Demon added. Or die trying, Seraphine agreed. So, my brave revolutionary, what do you say? Want to reshape the hidden world? Demon thought about Marcus, dying in a warehouse for witnessing something he shouldn't have. Thought about himself, bleeding out in a church because he'd taken on debts he couldn't pay. Thought about all the humans who existed in the margins of supernatural affairs, casualties of conflicts they didn't understand. And he thought about Valdris, imprisoned for millennia not because of malice but because no one knew what else to do with something they couldn't categorize. Yeah, he said finally. Let's reshape the hidden world. But we're doing it my way. No more secrets, no more acting like I know what I'm doing. We're going to be honest about the fact that this is experimental and might fail spectacularly. Perfect. Honesty is the most radical thing you could possibly bring to supernatural politics. Seraphine stood, extending her hand. Partners in revolution? Demon took her hand, this ancient vampire who damned and saved him in equal measure. Partners in revolution. The sun rose over Thornhaven, casting light on gardens where black roses bloomed and two figures stood at the boundary of light and shadow, planning the impossible. Word would spread of their plan. Opposition would be fierce. Success was far from guaranteed. But for the first time since his transformation, Demon Cross felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was living with purpose. The prophecy spoke of a daywalker who would judge the supernatural world. He'd found his judgment. He would judge them worthy of evolution or prove them right to fear change. Either way, the night would never be the same. Proposing the council was easy. Making it happen was the political equivalent of herding cats who all wanted to eat each other. Demon spent the next several months traveling under heavy guard, meeting with leaders of every major supernatural faction. Each meeting was a negotiation, a battle of wills and philosophies. The vampires were resistant because it meant sharing power. The werewolves were skeptical because it meant trusting vampires. The witches were cautiously optimistic but demanded guarantees. The fae were enigmatic and would only commit to observing with interest. But slowly and possibly the idea took hold. Not because everyone agreed it was good, but because everyone recognized that the alternative, continued isolation and eventual conflict, was worse. The modern world was shrinking. Supernatural communities were being discovered more frequently. Human technology was advancing to the point where hiding was becoming exponentially more difficult. Unity wasn't just idealistic, it was becoming practical necessity. The first council session was scheduled for the autumn equinox, a time of balance between light and dark that had symbolic significance for multiple factions. The location chosen was Thornhaven itself, renovated and expanded to accommodate hundreds of delegates. The neutral territory that had housed Demon's exile would become the birthplace of a new supernatural order. Mordecai predictably opposed the council with religious fervor. He called it heresy, dilution of vampire purity, and the final proof that Demon Cross was the doom the prophecy warned of. But even within the Mordecai clan, there were dissidents now, younger vampires who'd grown tired of stagnation, who saw the council as opportunity rather than threat. Mordecai's becoming irrelevant, Lysander reported during one of their planning sessions. And he knows it. That makes him more dangerous, not less. A zealot who's losing power is unpredictable. Keep him contained, Seraphine said. We don't need him supporting the council, we just need him not actively sabotaging it. The night before the council's first session, Demons stood in Thornhaven's grand hall and marveled at what they'd built. The space had been redesigned to accommodate different species' needs: shaded areas for vampires, open skylights for war creatures who drew strength from moon and stars, living wood furniture that witches had grown specifically for this purpose, and strange, impossible architecture that the Fae had contributed that seemed to exist in slightly different dimensions simultaneously. It was beautiful and chaotic and perfectly represented what they were attempting. "Nervous?" Seraphine asked, finding him in the darkness. "Terrified," Demon admitted. "Tomorrow I'm supposed to mediate between factions that have hated each other for millennia. I'm supposed to somehow convince them that cooperation benefits everyone. And I'm a 30-year-old former bartender with a few months of supernatural experience. You're also the Daywalker. The bridge between worlds. The one who saved the vampire clans from Valdris and survived assassination attempts and built relationships where only enmity existed before." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're exactly as qualified as anyone has ever been for a job that's never existed before. Which is to say, not at all. But you'll figure it out. Your confidence is inspiring and terrifying in equal measure." "I know. It's a gift." The first council session began at midnight, a compromise time when all factions could comfortably attend. Delegates filed into the grand hall, vampires in their elegant antiquity, werewolves radiating barely controlled wildness, witches in practical clothes that somehow hummed with power, Fae in garments that hurt to look at directly, and representatives from smaller factions that Demon was still learning about. Naga diplomats. Jinn observers. Even a single phoenix who attended in a form that appeared as a human wrapped in feathers and flame. Demon stood at the center of the circular chamber, on a platform that elevated him just enough to be visible but not so high as to suggest superiority. He dressed simply, dark clothes that wouldn't align him with any particular faction, with only the faint glow of his mark visible to remind everyone what he was. "Thank you for coming," he began, and his voice carried through the chamber with an authority he'd learned from Seraphine. "I know many of you are skeptical. You have centuries of reasons not to trust each other, not to cooperate. Valid reasons based on genuine conflicts and incompatible philosophies. I'm not going to stand here and pretend those differences don't exist, or that one meeting will solve millennia of problems." He paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. "But I also know that every faction here faces similar challenges. The human world is changing faster than ever before. Technology makes hiding harder. Population growth encroaches on territories that were once safely isolated. And within your own communities you're seeing the same stagnation, the same question. How do we remain relevant in a world that's moving past us?" Kira Ironhide stood from the werewolf delegation. "Pretty words from a vampire's pet. Why should we trust that this council isn't just a way for bloodsuckers to extend their control?" Demon didn't flinch at the provocation. "You shouldn't trust that. You should trust your own judgment. Look around this room. Do the vampires control this space? Or do you see equal representation? Do you see neutral ground where every voice has equal weight?" He gestured to the chamber's design. "This building itself is collaboration. Vampire architecture, witch-grown materials, Fae geometry, werewolf territorial markers. It exists because we all contributed. The council can work the same way." A vampire from the Night Whisper court stood. "And what authority do you claim, Demon Cross? What makes you qualified to mediate between us?" "None," Demon admitted freely. "I have no authority except what you choose to give me. I'm not ancient, not powerful in the traditional sense, not wise. But I am something none of you can be. I'm outside your systems. I don't have centuries of baggage informing my decisions. I don't have clan loyalty or pact bonds or coven obligations that compromise my neutrality. I'm just someone who exists between your worlds and thinks maybe that's useful." The Thorn Mother spoke from the witch delegation, her voice carrying ages. "The boy speaks truth. We witches have observed him carefully. He seeks no power for himself, only survival and understanding. That makes him rarer than any magical artifact." She stood, her presence commanding attention. "The covens will support this council. Cautiously with conditions, but we will support it." That declaration broke the dam. Other delegates began to stand, pledging conditional support. Not universal, the vampire old guard remained seated and several werewolf packs abstained, but enough. Enough to make the council real rather than theoretical. The session lasted until dawn, with Demon mediating disputes, proposing frameworks and mostly just listening. He let the delegates argue, let them vent centuries of grievances, but enforced rules. No violence, no domination displays, no interrupting. Just dialogue, even when that dialogue was heated. When the sun finally rose and the vampire delegates needed to withdraw to shaded chambers, Demon stood in the empty hall feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. They'd done it. Actually done it. Created something that had never existed before. But Mordecai hadn't been present. And that absence was a warning. The attack came during the third council session, 2 weeks later. Mordecai had been planning carefully, gathering support from the most conservative elements of every faction. He'd built a coalition not of cooperation but of fear. Entities that believed the old ways were the only ways, that change was inherently threatening. They struck with military precision during a session focused on territorial disputes. Dozens of zealots from multiple species, all united in their belief that the council was an abomination. They stormed Thornhaven with the intention of killing Demon and anyone who stood with him, of making an example that would terrify others away from cooperation. But they'd underestimated two things: how quickly the council delegates could unite when facing a common threat, and how much Demon had grown. The fighting was brutal. Vampire zealots clashed with werewolf defenders. Which combat magic lit the hall with impossible colors. Demon found himself at the center, no longer the mediator but the protected. Seraphine fought at his side, her ancient power fully unleashed. Kira Ironhide commanded werewolf warriors with tactical brilliance. The Thorn Mother wove bindings that held attackers without killing. And Demon, for the first time, let his full abilities manifest without restraint. The mark in his blood blazed so brightly it was painful to look at. He moved through the battlefield not as a fighter but as a force, suppressing vampire powers with a touch, healing wounded defenders with his blood, creating zones of calm where the fighting simply stopped. His presence became so overwhelming that both attackers and defenders paused, staring at what the Daywalker had become. Mordecai appeared then, having orchestrated the chaos to create this confrontation. He stood in the Grand Hall's entrance, a figure of absolute conviction wrapped in holy fury. "You see," he shouted to anyone who would listen. "This is the abomination. This is what the prophecy warned about, a power that doesn't fit, that breaks natural order, that will doom us all." Demon faced him across the hall, the battle stilling around them. "You're wrong," he said, his voice carrying supernatural weight. "The prophecy didn't warn about doom, it warned about judgment. And I've made my judgment, Mordecai. I judge you and everyone like you who's so afraid of change that you'd rather watch the world burn than adapt. Then you've become exactly what I predicted." Mordecai spread his arms, triumphant even in opposition. "A tyrant? Someone who forces their vision on others." "No," Demon lowered his arms, the glow fading to normal levels. "I'm not forcing anything. Everyone here chose to participate. Chose to try cooperation. You're the one who attacked, who tried to force your vision through violence." He looked around at the assembled delegates, attackers and defenders alike. "This is the choice, isn't it? This is what the prophecy really means. Not that I'll destroy you but that you'll be faced with a decision. Evolve or be left behind. Cooperate or isolate. Live with purpose or just exist." Silence. Even Mordecai seemed stunned by the simplicity of it. Then Lysander stepped forward from the crowd. "Brother," he said to Mordecai, "I love you. But you're wrong. You've become so focused on preserving the past that you've stopped seeing the present. This council, what Demon has built, it's not perfect. It's messy and difficult and might fail. But it's trying. It's attempting to solve problems that you pretend don't exist." "Traitor," Mordecai whispered. "Perhaps," Lysander agreed. "Or perhaps I'm the loyal one, loyal to what we were supposed to be rather than what we've become. The First Bloods weren't meant to rule, they were meant to protect. We've forgotten that. Demon is reminding us." One by one the attackers stood down. Not all of them, some were too committed to their beliefs, but enough. Enough that the threat dissolved not through victory but through choice. The zealots were disarmed and escorted away, not to be executed but to be judged by their own communities. Restorative justice rather than retributive. Mordecai stood alone, abandoned by even his most fervent supporters. He looked at Demon with eyes that held millennia of conviction crumbling. "What are you?" he asked, and for the first time, it wasn't an accusation but a genuine question. "I'm the bridge," Demon said simply. "Between human and supernatural. Between past and future. Between what you were and what you could be. I'm not your doom, Mordecai. I'm your opportunity to choose differently." The Hierophant stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Not in defeat exactly but in contemplation. The absolute certainty he'd carried for millennia had been shaken, and that was its own kind of transformation. In the aftermath the council solidified. The attack had proven both its necessity and its resilience. Delegates who'd been skeptical became supporters. Factions that had abstained requested membership. Even some of Mordecai's former coalition approached Demon quietly, asking how they could participate despite their previous opposition. "You did it," Seraphine said as they surveyed the repairs to Thornhaven. "Actually did it. Created something new that works." "We did it," Demon corrected. "None of this happens without you saving me, without Lysander supporting us, without every delegate who chose to participate despite their fears. Ever the humble revolutionary." She smiled, genuine and warm. "So what now? The council exists. You've fulfilled the prophecy, proved you're the bridge. What does the Daywalker do with the rest of his very long life?" Demon thought about that. Thought about how far he'd come from bleeding out in an abandoned cathedral. "I think," he said slowly, "I just keep being what I am. Keep reminding everyone that change doesn't have to be catastrophic. Keep building bridges even when it's difficult. Maybe mentor others like me, there will be others, eventually. People who don't fit categories, who exist between worlds. They'll need someone to show them it's possible." "And us?" Seraphine asked. "What are we?" Demon looked at her, this ancient being who'd chosen to save him when every rational calculation said not to. "We're partners. In revolution, in bridge building, in whatever comes next. If you'll have me." "I saved your life with my bite," Seraphine said, echoing the beginning of this impossible journey. "Made every clan want you dead. Seems only fair I stick around to see how it all turns out." "Fair?" Demon agreed. "Though I should warn you, my life seems to attract the impossible." "Good," Seraphine said. "Impossible is so much more interesting than stagnant." They stood together as the sun set on Thornhaven, on the council, on a supernatural world that had been irrevocably changed by one desperate choice in an abandoned cathedral. There would be more challenges. More opposition. The council would face crises that would test its foundations. But it existed now, a living proof that cooperation was possible, that change didn't have to mean destruction. Demon Cross had been saved by a vampire queen's bite. Had been marked with power that made him a target. Had survived assassination attempts and political warfare and his own doubts. And in surviving he'd become something impossible. Hope made manifest, a bridge between worlds, the Daywalker who judged the supernatural world worthy of evolution. The night would never be the same. But then again neither would the day. And in the space between light and darkness, at the boundary where both could meet, Demon Cross stood as proof that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and that being saved can be the first step toward saving others. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not through fire or judgment. Through choice. Through difficulty. Through two people deciding that mercy mattered more than law, that possibility was worth the risk, that the world could be different if someone was brave enough to try. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky. Below them, the first lights of human cities twinkled to life. And between heaven and earth, between human and supernatural, between past and future, the Daywalker and the Vampire Queen began planning tomorrow. Because there were always more bridges to build, more impossibilities to attempt, more lives to save. And they were just getting started. This story explored themes of salvation, transformation, and the courage to build bridges in a world that profits from division. Demon Cross's journey from dying bartender to daywalker mirrors anyone who's been given an unexpected second chance and had to decide what to do with it. The vampire queen Seraphine represents the power of choosing mercy over law, of recognizing when systems have outlived their purpose. Their partnership demonstrates that change requires both insider knowledge, her centuries of experience, and outside perspective, his fresh eyes. The supernatural factions, vampires, werewolves, witches, fae, serve as allegory for any divided communities that share common challenges but remain isolated through tradition, fear, or pride. The council represents the difficult, messy work of cooperation that benefits everyone but demands everyone change. And the prophecy? It was never about doom or salvation imposed from outside. It was about choice. About being confronted with change and deciding whether to embrace evolution or cling to stagnation. Every character faced that choice, and their decisions shaped not just their own fates but the future of their entire world. Sometimes being saved is just the beginning. Sometimes the real heroism is in how you use your second chance, not just to survive but to help others survive too. To build bridges instead of walls. To choose mercy over judgment even when judgment would be easier. Demon Cross was saved by a bite that should have killed him. But he saved himself by choosing to be more than what either fate or prophecy demanded. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being what the world needs, even when you have no idea what you're doing. The bridges between worlds are built by those